Hi, my name is Perez Breva. I teach at MIT, a program called MIT Innovation Teams. And I'm here today to tell you about innovation and the entrepreneurial mindset. We have about 25 minutes to discuss a few ideas about what it means to innovate, what's the meaning of innovation, and what's the meaning of the entrepreneurial mindset in that context. And I'm going to do that with our experience, the experience we've actually garnered over the last 10, 12 years, to think about what it means to innovate with technology for engineers and non-engineers to work together to solve problems that matter. So before I get into the heart of the matter, let me tell you a bit about myself and how we're going to play this out. So I have a really cool setup with me, like a good engineer, with lots of screens, big cameras, a switch, so it can do lots of funny things. One of them is I can appear in tiny there and welcome you to this conference in a tiny screen up there, and we'll do this live. The other thing I can do is I can pull up my slides a different way. You'll see only half of that same slide, right? So for the presentation today, I want you to feel like we are actually having a conversation, or as best we can in this remote world we are having to live in. And so without further ado, that's how we're going to play it out for the next 20-25 minutes. Let me tell you a bit about my experience and then we'll get going. So this is who I am, what I've been working on over the last 20 years. I have a dual life. Some days I worry about innovating, understood as solving problems that matter. Some days I worry about artificial intelligence, understood about how to make computers work for us to solve problems we couldn't solve any other way. And I've gathered some degree of success in both. But the experience I'm going to share with you today and the thinking I want to do with you today here is about in connection with one program that's called MIT iTeams, that I run at MIT for the last 10, 12 years. So what is this? So at MIT, we have this program. We built this program where we take MIT technologies from the lab, and then we ask ourselves this question. Well, this is great. It's new. We have kind of like a new toy to play with. Now, what do we do with this? Most importantly, what problem out there requires us that we take this all the way down to society and solve a problem that matters for them? And so we could set up this as a translation program. In the surface, that's what it looks like. Instead, we set it up as an educational experience. And I'll tell you all about this today and why that has informed a very unique way of thinking about innovation for engineers, for graduates, for undergraduates, even for business students that I teach to. So in a way, the second thing I'm going to achieve today is not only tell you about this program and this experience, but also cause you to think about a very different way to think about innovation. I may sound contrarian. I may sound a bit provocative. That's all intentional so that we can have a much livelier discussion. And you see how this will work out. So let me tell you a bit more about iTeams before I tell you how we'll set up the day of today, and then we'll go into the heart of the matter. So iTeams is this program that over the last 10, 12 years has actually seen over 200 MIT breakthroughs. We've worked with more than 150 MIT laboratories from all over. Like whatever you can imagine might be thought about at MIT, from software to nanotechnology. We've touched some of that. And we thought about where on earth could we take that so that we have an actual impact in the world. We're not talking about startups. Sure, there are startups too. There's actually lots of startups that have come out of this program. We're talking about real impact, using technology to make the world a better place, using technology to solve problems that matter. And this started almost like an experiment 10, 12 years ago, could not have worked. But what happened is it kind of did. And the story of today is the story of what we've learned as we set this up, the principles that drove us, and how we systematize those principles to do many more things, and how you can actually play with us or build from this for your own innovation programs. One more thing I'll say is that more than 40 companies have emerged from this program over the last 40 years, over the last 10 years. Those 40 companies are all deep tech companies, started by business people and by engineers. And they represent a different way to start companies. That's what we're going to discuss about. But I told you this is an educational program. This educational program is teaching students to solve this strange conundrum, which is that we all believe that we want to solve problems that matter, and we all believe that that should be done with technology. And yet, how do you do it? It's not like problems come in lists to solve, problems to be solved are in a list. It's not like technologies are ready to solve problems already, like the moment they leave the lab. Often it takes years, decades for a technology to find its use. So how do we do that? How do we wrap our head around the problem of solving problems that matter, the challenge of solving problems that matter with technology? That's what my students learn. And then they go on and do it with the company, with the technologies they looked at in class or with others. And the purpose of today is to add 2 extra challenges to that conversation. It's not just about problems that matter in technology. It's what does it mean to acquire an entrepreneurial mindset for innovation and rising above a conversation that has been sort of too centered around startups over the last 10, 20 years. So I'm not here today to tell you about startups. I'm here today about to tell you about entrepreneurial mindset in connection with innovation, whether it be in a startup, in a large organization, or inside education. And that's an important distinction. I find that most of my students are underserved by a vision of innovation that's super limited to startups, when in reality, innovation happens all over the place. So let me kind of tell you by example what I mean by that. So, and I'll go back to full screen for a second. So a lot of what my students hear or have heard about before they join my class, and a lot of what people in industry that have come and discussed things with me hear about, is that innovation is all about startups. And so naturally, because they think innovation is all about startups, they think about this mindset, a very strange mindset when you think about it, which is they hear the stories of really successful people in hindsight, meaning people that have already been successful, that remember all the good things about their stories. We've all been through this. We all remember a beautified version of our past rather than everything we did, right? And then they pile on these stories, and then they come back to the very beginning of their stories, which is right here, and they've tried to copy what these people remember in the form of one minimum viable product or whatnot. And then they jump off a cliff. And there's a huge void in the middle. So for ideas that are actually tiny enough for which this cliff is very small, they might succeed. But for all those bold ideas where we need to think about more carefully, where we need to actually have true innovation come in, it turns out, and that's what I've discovered over the last decade, there is an entire space of a lot of things to do, work on, a whole new mindset to cultivate in the middle. And that's what I've been teaching for the last decade, and that's what we're going to discuss about. And the critical insight to derive from this part of my presentation today is that things do not look the same from here and from here. When you're done, it looks like a jag line. When you're starting, it looks like a sort of whirlpool of who knows what, and a big cliff ahead before you can actually emulate those stories. And that's the mindset we need to imbue upon our students. This thing can be built, and you can become better at it through practice. Now, to persuade you that that's actually the case, right? Well, let me just show you another slide where I'll tell you how much we've practiced this. So for the last decade and change, we have not just done the MIT thing I told you about, MIT iTeams. We've actually produced, let me just bring myself back up. I forgot, sorry about that. We've produced a whole host of programs at MIT and worldwide, in academia, industry, even venture capital. We've set up what I call over 30 innovating factories, where people think about problems to solve and find technologies to solve them, if not invent them. And that's the experience I want to share with you. Now, if you like what you hear today, you should know that not only did we do all those things, we spent the time to actually write a book. So this is a book that has gathered lots of success in press. It was published about 2.5 years ago, right before the pandemic. And the organization of Keen Foundation, the Keen Conference, has been so kind as to offer a courtesy copy to those of you that would like to have one. So if you look in your registration materials, you'll find an opportunity to buy this book or to get a copy free from the Keen Foundation. For those of you that would like to discuss these ideas further, you should know that we're going to host a live Q&A session today, this afternoon. More details will appear on the screen or will be sent your way through the standard channels. And I look forward to discussing all of what I'm going to be talking to you about today, later, live in a conversation. So with that said, a very successful MIT program, exported to a number of geographies, a book, a live Q&A conversation. Let me get back to today. Today I want to tell you about 3 ideas, that I hope to discuss further this afternoon. And these three ideas are the following. I'm going to show them back again here, appearing on the top. So there is three principles that lay the foundation for all the work we've done. And that's what we teach the students. We teach them three principles that translate into three key skills. A principle for diversification, which is in the face of maximum uncertainty, diversification is the only rational choice. This means that a lot of the advice they get in other classes about minimum viable products is actually high risk. And so have them wrestle with this idea. Minimum viable products are useful in one context, but may not be useful in the most open uncertainty that we face today. There's another principle for exploring and learning, which is that we learn by being productively wrong, from being wrong, through what we call near misses. This is a term that comes from artificial intelligence, and I'll tell you more about it through the presentation. And the third principle is that the idea of innovating is about building economies of scale. And what I mean by that is that you want to learn a disproportionate amount with the resources you have today, so you don't fail in any way that's predictable later. So those are the three principles that we've actually used to build all the things I was telling you about earlier. And today I'm going to tell you about these three principles in reverse. We're going to start with the task, which is how to build those economies of scale, how to traverse economies of scale. Then we're going to go on to how do you actually start? And then we're going to close with some ideas about how all this has applied to education for us and how it might be helpful to you as you think about your programs and innovation in your own educational programs, whatever your program is about. So let me get started with the task. The task is to solve a problem that matters, period. Now, this is a big problem. I mean, I know I just said problem twice. The challenge here is the following. Problems that matter don't come in lists. Actually, the problems that matter are not even well defined, and they live at a scale that's much grander than where we are today. And technologies come in papers, in small packages, they live at another scale altogether. So the big task our entrepreneurs have to do, or our innovators have to do, or even big corporations have to do, is to sort of reconcile the fact that the problem that we want to solve lives at a huge scale, and the technologies we need for it live at a completely other scale. So they need to learn how to go up and down scale until they figure out what it would mean to be successful in solving that problem that's elusive with technologies that are, as of yet, unproven. That's a big ask. Now, that's a tough question. It requires that you be open to uncertainty. It's a difficult thing to do for my students. And I'm not expecting you to kind of take me at face value. So instead, let me show you some of the examples I use with my own students to help them understand the challenge. Because there is a backdoor to this challenge that most people take. So what I do at this point in my classes is I show my students this slide with this contraption. What you see is a partly shiny contraption with some white in it that's next to a pen. You can probably see that it's about the size of a regular pen. And so I ask my students, what do you think this is? And I get all kinds of answers. Some people tell me it's a servo motor, a music box, a piston. Someone even suggested it was a fountain pen. So I get all sorts of interesting answers. Then I show them the next pictures. I show them the exact next slide. And I tell them, well, what do you think I'm talking about here? And they all answer me saying, laser, or applications of laser, or whatnot. And maybe you've thought about the same things yourselves. So why is this slide important? Why am I asking this question? Well, this is a huge challenge all of our innovators have ahead of them. This slide I showed you a second ago is actually one laser. To be precise, it's actually the first laser. The laser that came before anybody knew what to do with it. And the second pictures are all truly applications of the laser. So those are pictures of the same thing. And what matters is, to me, for discussion of what we mean by innovation, is which one of these two was the actual innovation. So I get all kinds of answers. There is no correct answer. I don't know which one of these two is the innovation, but what you need to be aware of is that this one that I'm circling right now is really an expression of an application, a product. Now that we know what the laser is and what it's good for, it's really easy to imagine products. But when the laser first appeared, imagining products was hard. So again, in hindsight, imagining a product is very easy, and so all my students want to guess a product. But in foresight, that's not how you start. It actually goes further. The difference between these two pictures is really 20 years and a huge imagination gap. You don't start by imagining products. True innovation starts by actually conceiving something else. And we're going to talk about what that something else is. But what I tell my students is beware of product myopia, because product myopia has you thinking about products instead of organizations that you need to build and the purpose those technologies fulfill and the problems you actually solve with those technologies. But still, I could be wrong, right? I've been telling you about problems, and you could argue, you know what? Products mentalities have worked very well for a long time. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it should be easy to kind of guess a product and go on with it. So then that's what you need, right? You need to be able to persuade yourself that guessing products is easy, that getting it right is easy. And so I typically do an exercise in my classes, which is I ask my students to look at these 6 pictures. And I'm going to ask you to do the exact same thing right now. And we'll give you a minute or so to think about this. So what you see here are 6 pictures. Each of them shows you the last prototype or the first working gizmo of something that went on to become an innovation. And I'll give you one example. This is the first ever working laser, right? So that doesn't count. That meaning we already know that. Now imagine I had the power to bring you back to the moment where this first appeared, right? And all you need to tell me is which of these would you want to go back to? Let me rephrase my question so I'm clear about what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to guess which of these is the right innovation. One of these remaining 5 is a true innovation. Well, the first working version of something that became an innovation. And if you knew which one it is, you would make millions. You just need to tell me which one. So I typically ask students to vote on these. We give them names. So there is A, something that's held together by Scotch tape. There's C, something that seems to have a deck of cards to hold something. There's D, something that has a lot of Lego. There's E, something that holds a canteen. And there is F, something that seems to have a fishing boat. So your task is to vote. Think about it. We'll get to discuss the results of what you thought about this later in the Q&A session if you join me. For now, let me advance you what the result actually is. Or the 2 main conclusions is that every time I run this experiment, I encounter the exact same problem, which is that what I summarize in my next slide, if I can make this work, which is here. Before I even tell you what each of these is, I'm going to tell you that being right is harder than not. What do I mean by that? Well, which one of these 5 is the correct true innovation without information from the future? It gets even harder if we get to vote about it, because now not only don't we know anything, we are going to average out our ignorance and try to vote as to which of these is the good one. If many of you have voted for this or this or this or this, you were right, actually, because I introduced 4 out of 5 that were true innovations. This was actually the first iPad. This is the first Kinect. This is the boat that led to Greenpeace. This is the first prototype of the PCR machine, and we all know what a PCR is today, even though 5 years ago no one knew. And this is something I had my students do in a basement when exploring a problem, meaning that's something that my students produce building on the principles we're discussing today of experimentation on problems. And what I've discovered over the years is that by showing these examples that this one turns out to be indistinguishable from the rest of this stage, which means that good and bad ideas may not be distinguishable from one another at the outset, and what makes them innovation is yet to come. So how do we address this problem of uncertainty? And so the first part is you need to learn to navigate scale. That's what we've discussed thus far. The problem is at the big scale. The tools with which you are going to play live at another scale. And your job is to figure out what it means to be successful in this domain. So as a summary of this part of my presentation, here's an idea, right? Risk has nothing to do with how preposterous a problem you focused, but with how much you've let your idea charm you into not learning anything. So that's one part of my presentation today. The part about we need to associate the problem of innovating or the challenges of innovating with a challenge of scale, figuring out what the problem is and having the means to play with that problem at a scale until we figure out what solving that problem means. And that requires to embrace uncertainty and to have means to reduce that uncertainty. Now, that's all fine and well, but still, assume you believe me and you think that this is truly a problem of scale. How do you even start? We know that the problem lives up there. We know that technologies are ill suited for that problem now. So what's the beginning? So for a long time, I wrestled with that question myself, and I found this video that explains that problem. Now, this video, I'm not going to show you the video today. I'm going to show you a quote from the video to make it faster on us, and I'm going to make myself small again up top. So this is a quote from the inventor of the laser in an interview around 1990 in national TV. That's about 20 years after he invented the first laser. That's the laser I showed you a few slides ago. And it goes on, says, one of the things I at least attempted to do, and I did turn out to be successful, was to use things that were already around. In other words, if I had to develop a special lamp, that would be a whole other research project. If I had to figure out a new kind of crystal, ... So instead, he ordered a crystal on the phone, he got a lamp from a photography catalog, and the rest was simple machining. Let me stop there for a second to think about what this means. It means that if Amazon had been around when Dr. Mayman was doing this, he would have ordered all the parts for the first laser ever through Amazon. That's very shocking to me, that the first laser ever was a pet project on the side with parts purchased in a way that's most like through Amazon. So is this true? Is this real? Is this an anecdote? Every book I read on the topic seems to suggest that this was anecdotal. It would have happened anywhere else. It just happened to happen this way. But, I was curious, so I looked and looked and looked, and I found out all kinds of funny things. It turns out that, this is the magazine that two hackers, actually, at the time they would not have been called hackers, but two people called William Gates and Paul Allen bought in a kiosk in Harvard Square that included a kit to manufacture or to build or assemble your own microcomputer, with which they then went on to eventually found Microsoft. So Microsoft starts out of a kit produced in a magazine. The first bill in China to appear in China was truly a merchant receipt. The first Google computer, or the first Google server, used Lego pieces to build a rack server and a bunch of other things, repurposing. The first transparent display produced at MIT a few years ago, not many, comes from the realization that small nanoparticles that you could order on the phone poured onto a mix to build glass would actually result into being able to build a transparent display. You can check that in the book or online to find more information about how to actually do it. You can build your own transparent display at home for about $200. But it gets even better, actually. Could it be really true that innovating is all a matter of repurposing? That struck me as an art of genius. So that would be great, because then you can do anything, right? So what if it were? And what I've done over the last years to persuade me that this might be true is looked at a number of examples. And you see, Bitcoin comes from merging peer-to-peer sharing, Napster, which many of you will remember, with encryption. That's the beginning of blockchain. And it's not me saying it. It's the first paper of blockchain to show these things. Tesla. The first Tesla car starts from the inside that says, wait a second, these batteries here just became powerful enough so that enough of them assembled together with the light chassis of a car, and this is the Lotus chassis, which was made in aluminum, would be enough to power an electric car. So that's the first Tesla. Again, parts that already existed, repurposing. But other people had done car factories before the same way. Here's another example. Henry Ford got the inspiration for the assembly line by looking at a butcher shop and realizing that if you can disassemble cows that way, maybe you can assemble cars the other way around. That was the way he described it. Actually, the first factory with the first assembly line did use the same equipment, or so we're told. And one more example, Greenpeace. Greenpeace starts with a bunch of activists, people with entrepreneurial mindset, trying to persuade the world that the planet was in danger by actually first having a PR campaign. And when that did not work, fleeting a boat and trying to stop the United States from testing nuclear bombs near Alaska. The boat was funded from the proceeds of a concert, and they communicated back with their homes with a radio that helped the press keep up with their efforts. They never stopped the United States from testing the nuclear bombs, but this created the uproar about the planet being in danger that we're looking to actually help people see. Nowadays we have a movement, an environmental movement that's largely born out of this. So why am I showing you all this? Well, I want to persuade you that I've shown you enough. I'm having you go through the same reasoning I went through. I've seen enough examples of this by now, and I've shown you enough examples of this by now. And these are some of the ones you see in the screen, to persuade you of one idea, or at least to cause you to consider one idea, which is the beginning of these fantastic innovations is not a minimum viable product, is not a phenomenal earth-shattering idea. It's a desire, an entrepreneurial mindset to put things together and demonstrate to yourself, first, what shape does that problem take? So another way to put it is that at its genesis, nothing about an innovation is new. And let me go back to the Greenpeace example for a second to show you what I mean. You could argue, well, all these parts are kind of old, but the ideas were new. Well, at least in the Greenpeace example, it turns out that not even the idea was new. The idea to stop the United States from, or prevent them from testing nuclear bombs had occurred before. These guys, Golden Rule, tried in the 1960s to stop the United States from testing nuclear bombs in the Pacific Ocean, and they failed. And they were just detained and arrested, and no one knew about them. Actually, but these people knew about this idea, and they tried to reproduce it with different means. So even the idea was repurposed in that case. So nothing is new at the very beginning, not even the idea. And that should be a relief, because it's all about attitude, culture, and a given mindset to bring together parts to demonstrate to yourself at a scale that the problem is real. In fact, in all the examples I've looked at, and that's the provocative idea I want to share with you today and discuss this afternoon. In fact, nearly everything that changed the world started out aiming to solve a problem that mattered, repurposing something that existed and was being used for something else, to make that problem that mattered tangible. And along the process, the people that did that learned, and they used and invented technologies to scale up. That's the basic idea for their program. So those are two key ideas I've shared today with you, and I have like a few minutes, I think, left to tell you more about how this fits into an educational picture. How could you use this yourself? How did it work for us? 2 or 3 thoughts for you there. First, everything I've told you about is not just a theory that we've researched through action. It's something we've set up at MIT and worldwide, inside academia and in industry. But we've started it as a set of educational programs. And the reason why the insight came to us that education was critical for us to learn this and to promote this mindset comes from this paper I'm going to show you now full screen, this graph. So this graph shows you the results of a study, a psychological study in which they followed a cohort of pianists over the span of 20 years. Now, at the end of those 20 years, it was possible to determine or tell apart the experts from the amateurs. The same way that we now can tell apart what was an innovation and what wasn't back way when of the innovations that were produced in the last 20 years. But the question was this an acquired talent? Was this part of the initial idea in the brain, or was this something, a skill that was acquired? And unequivocally, this paper proves that this is actually a skill that is acquired and can be acquired by anyone. Now, you've seen different versions of this idea because Malcolm Gladwell popularized this number here that says that all you need to become an expert is 10,000 hours. But that's not exactly what this paper says. What this paper says, and the basis of our work in iTeams, and how we got this started, was the realization that there is a set of skills you can practice deliberately that will get you the entrepreneurial mindset and the attitude and the skills you can produce constantly. So what these pianists did was practice more hours a day, those skills, than what these pianists produce. And as a result, they became experts because they practiced those skills continuously and deliberately. And so the question for innovation and for your programs is, what is the set of skills that we have our students practice in a continuous manner that they can walk away with and practice on every single one of their ventures until they are successful or in order to be successful. Those are the skills I've shared with you. There's just one I haven't told you yet about, which is this one. Don't fail. And that might well be the most provocative thought I've told you today, because we've spent 20 years hearing people telling you, fail fast, fail forward. And the answer is no, don't fail. Every single one of the entrepreneurs and innovators we revere was so afraid of failure that they actually planned against it. And that sure turns out to be a very interesting mindset. It's actually a method. It's the same method that takes the astronauts to the space station. There's a quote from an interview from Chris Hadfield, in which he says that half of the risk of a 6-month flight is in the first 9 minutes. And so you can read the rest of the quote, but what it essentially says is that in order for them to succeed at getting to the International Space Station and come back, they spent an enormous amount of time figuring out what will kill them, practicing so that that thing doesn't kill them, so they get to live another day. And that's the entrepreneurial mindset. My students, the ones that finish my class and go on to build companies or join companies that do very innovative things, all of them agree on one idea, which is the key skill is that the practice of trying to find out how you're wrong and overcoming that is what helps them be successful. We started our educational program the exact same way. And that's what I'm going to ask you to think about for your educational programs. Our educational program was a pilot, you can call it. The pilot was a class for a given number of students. It was actually the first year, I think it was 50. So it wasn't even a small class. But the basic idea is we wanted to test these principles, and the best vehicle to do it was a class rather than a program or something else. And so we built a class. And this could have easily failed. But that's not interesting. What we built is a pilot that taught us how to do plenty more things. And so it started as a class. It has had its own impact with the technologies we've helped push forward. But it's also helped us build a whole slew of other materials. The innovation workshop with which we actually helped create a new university in Russia. We grounded the whole new culture of that MIT's Caltech program with these same principles. We've built online courses, week-long experiences, corporate programs, even a venture capital model based on these ideas. All from the same principles and all from a mastery experience. You can learn more about why that mastery experience setup helps improve entrepreneurial intent and self-efficacy, which are both predictors of entrepreneurial success and entrepreneurial mindset in the paper I quote in the slide. So to close, what I'm proposing you think about in terms of innovation is the process with teaching class. Sorry, this slide looks funny because I typically use my funny setup like this to show it. So there's 3 key ideas to walk away in terms of what to do. The first one is you start by diversifying. You want to make your idea robust. It's not about having one good idea. It's about having your idea set up in such a way that it will survive your being wrong. The second step is build a pilot to kill your idea. Because frankly, if it's going to die, you might as well kill it yourself much faster than anybody else. So your pilot is not about having your idea in small increments. It's about having the biggest version of the idea you can possibly implement and afford to implement that will teach you the most you can about all the ways in which this could fail. It's like the astronauts. The objective is to go back to the International Space Station and come back. And the last step, once you've actually survived, is to sort of scale up and build a platform with which you can build all the other programs and engage even more people for your organization. And all along, this is about repurposing what you already have and do. It's not about inventing from scratch. So I've told you about this all along. You can see how this connects to how at the Genesis, nothing about an innovation is new. It connects to the idea I shared with you that resolved that your mission will fail only in ways no one could have predicted, like the astronauts fail at scale so that you don't die. And the last one is risk has nothing to do with how preposterous a problem you focused on, but how much you've let your idea charm you into not learning anything. So my closing for today, and I hope I've persuaded you that there is a whole different approach to think about innovation and to inspire an entrepreneurial mindset, to even introduce this entrepreneurial mindset into your own educational endeavors or for whatever you want to do it. And it's much simpler, and much more resonating, and might resonate much more with an engineering mindset. So these are the 3 principles I told you at the opening I wanted to share with you today. And I've given you probably way more examples than I should have in just such a tiny amount of time as the one we had today. So to at least spur conversation about what you might be able to achieve with the means you have today. And these are 3 simple principles that you can actually incorporate into any endeavor, including new companies or existing organizations. First one, the objective is to diversify. It's not about guessing the product right. It's about realizing that in the face of maximum uncertainty, diversification, meaning having multiple options in parallel, is the only rational choice. And what I mean by that is if you truly don't know anything, which is the setup for a true innovation, then all you can do is diversify your options. The second one is about exploring and learning. We learn by being productively wrong. From being wrong, how you learn? By near misses. Near misses are those little changes you do to things that result in you realizing that there is a whole other opportunity or a whole other version of the problem you had not thought about. And third, we build economies of scale, not leverage them, but build them, which means that you are to set your experiments and your organization in such a way that you stand to learn a disproportionate amount with the resources you have today. It's not about going small. It's about not wasting a single dime and learning more if you can from every dollar. That's what I have for you today. Please remember that if you like these ideas and you would like to discuss them further, there's going to be a live Q&A this afternoon in which we can discuss what your thoughts are about these and how you may want to implement these things yourselves in your own programs. Remember also there is the organization has made available as a courtesy copies of my book for those of you that would like to have one. So please check your registration materials and please reach out and start the conversation offline anytime with my LinkedIn profile or checking the iTeams pages at MIT. Thank you very much.